The question of the pupil. In your talk entitled The Integration of the Teaching, and in other talks that you have given and that we've been able to listen to, you are at times quite critical of those in what you call the Gurdjieff tradition, that is to say, the established Gurdjieff teaching, which you claim comes from Ouspensky and not from Gurdjieff. Could you say something about this? Because at times this criticism of the Gurdjieff teachers in the Gurdjieff tradition can be quite harsh and seems not to be justified in the light of the fact of, what shall I say, in the light of your own personal status in this Gurdjieff tradition, which is not really established. They are the Gurdjieff teachers and you are not. With what authority, therefore, are you able to criticise them? This is my question. The teacher replies, I am able to, as you say, criticise those teachers in what I call the Gurdjieff tradition, and which I suggest comes from Ouspensky, because of two facts that are often ignored or not even thought about. The first of these is that the book In Search of the Miraculous by P.D. Ouspensky was published in 1950. This means that many of the authorities, as it were, I'm struggling for the language here because it's a question I'm not used to answering. Many of the authorities, the authoritative teachers in the Gurdjieff tradition had not read this book. It was only published in 1950. So many of the pupils of Ouspensky, the pupils of Gurdjieff, had not read this book until it was published in 1950. The second fact is that the book In Search of the book Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson, the Tales of Beelzebub to His Grandson, was published. This is a book by Gurdjieff. It was published in 1950. Prior to this, Ouspensky's pupils had not read this book and could not read this book. Gurdjieff's pupils could not read this book and had not read this book. In both these cases, extracts from the books, chapters perhaps from these books, were read aloud to the pupils, either of Ouspensky as appropriate or Gurdjieff. But overall, the pupils of these two distinct and different teachers had not read these books. These books were published in 1950. So from 1950 onwards, it was possible for anyone to buy these books, to read these books, and the significant point that I would make here, to compare these two books. Now, I was actually born, although I'm an elderly man now, I was actually born after 1950. So my whole life, these books have been available. And for well over 50 years now, I've been reading these books. And for several decades of that, many decades of that, I've been comparing these books. Comparing the teaching presented in the book In Search of the Miraculous by Ouspensky with the teaching presented in the book The Tales of Beelzebub to His Grandson by Gurdjieff. And they're completely different teachings. And I didn't rest. I haven't rested satisfied until I knew every difference, every point between these two books, all the differences, that they are completely different teachings. And now that I know that they are completely different teachings, with authority, I can say that what you are teaching, what you are involved in, what this person is teaching, what that person is teaching, is not Gurdjieff's teaching, because it doesn't correspond to what Gurdjieff writes in his own book, The Tales of Beelzebub to His Grandson. It is a teaching that comes from Ouspensky, because it corresponds to what is in the book In Search of the Miraculous by Ouspensky. I can only do this because these two books were published in 1950. Teachers prior to 1950, could not do this. They did not know anything about, I perhaps exaggerate, they did not know anything about Ouspensky's teaching. They did not know anything about Gurdjieff's teaching. But I do, because I can read these books, and over a long period of time, I've compared these books, these two completely different teachings, and found every difference between them, and can therefore reconstruct, in the light of all these differences, what it was exactly that Ouspensky was teaching, and what it was exactly that Gurdjieff was teaching. Two completely different teachings. So, as you speak about my talks and things that I'm teaching, I always start those talks by saying there are two completely different teachings associated with the name of Gurdjieff. There is the Gurdjieff tradition, which actually comes from Ouspensky and is centred upon the teaching in this book published in 1950, In Search of the Miraculous, Fragments of an Unknown Teaching, by Ouspensky. Gurdjieff did not write this book. And there is another teaching that not many people know, not many people follow, not many people understand, that comes from Gurdjieff and is in his book, published in 1950, The Tales of Beelzebub to His Grandson. And these two teachings are completely different. The question of the pupil. You are speaking here of a Gurdjieff tradition, as if such a tradition exists. But there are many of us who believe that Gurdjieff's teaching is such a teaching that it cannot actually be defined. It has never been defined what is Gurdjieff's teaching. Could you define Gurdjieff's teaching for us so that we understand a bit better what it is that you are speaking about? The teacher replies, there are those in the Gurdjieff tradition who claim that Gurdjieff's teaching cannot be defined. This is absurd. The Gurdjieff tradition essentially comes from the book In Search of the Miraculous by Ouspensky. And it can be defined quite easily. The Gurdjieff tradition states that it is possible for the ordinary man and woman to develop in the course of their lives. This development is a result of work upon oneself. They need to work upon themselves in particular directions and in particular ways, directed by a teacher. So it is possible for the ordinary man and woman to develop. And the Gurdjieff tradition, coming from Ouspensky, says that the development of the ordinary man and woman is the development of their consciousness. That is, it is a development to an increasing degree of self-consciousness or consciousness of self. And that is the Gurdjieff tradition. It's easily defined. That's what it's saying. Now, what I'm explaining to you when I say there are two completely different teachings associated with the name of G.I. Gurdjieff is that in the book The Tales of Beelzebub to His Grandson we find a completely different story. Gurdjieff says it is absolutely impossible for the ordinary man and woman to develop in the course of their lives in any way. This is absolutely impossible. And Gurdjieff's teaching is a response to that situation. First of all, explaining that situation, why, and then suggesting a way out of that situation. So what's the reason for that situation? As Gurdjieff says, it's absolutely impossible for ordinary men and women to develop in any way in the course of their lives. Any attempt to do so does not work and only makes their situation worse, only makes our situation worse. Why? And Gurdjieff's teaching is that there is a break in the chain of energetic production in us as ordinary men and women. We don't have the energies we should have. We don't have the food at higher levels that we should have. We fall to a very low energetic state, a depleted energetic state. In this depleted energetic state, we fall into internal structures from which we cannot escape. We can't exist independently of these structures. We are totally identified with these structures, such as we have three centres, such as we have two consciousnesses having nothing in common, that is, two conscious minds, having absolutely nothing in common. We can't get out of this situation because we don't have the energies to do so. We don't exist. We are totally identified with these type of structures. These are the two most obvious ones. We're totally identified with these structures. We don't exist independently of these structures. And so we are forced to live our lives to create an abnormal psychology. The machine, as Gurdjieff said to Ouspensky, doesn't work properly. It doesn't have the energy to do so. So the operator of the machine, us, we have to use the machine in an abnormal way. So we create an abnormal psychology in ourselves. Gurdjieff writes about this 150 times in his book, The Tales of Beelzebub to his grandson. He says we live in the abnormal, external conditions of we're ordinary men and women, the abnormal external conditions of ordinary being existence established by us ourselves. We establish an abnormal psychology, a false, fictitious and unreal conscious mind at a very low level, us as we are. And being a false, fictitious and unreal conscious mind at a very low level, we can't develop in any way. We can only develop a false, fictitious and unreal conscious mind at a low level. What's the point of that? It won't happen anyway. But even if we do, it's a wrong development because it's a false, fictitious and unreal conscious mind. It's an abnormal psychology. That's Gurdjieff's teaching. So what does he say we should do? He says there is a break in the chain of energetic production in us. We need to remedy the break in the chain of energetic production in us so that we do have the energies we should have and we start to rebuild the much more augmented energetic background to a normal life, not an ordinary life at a low level, but a normal life at the level we should be, a higher energetic level, by remedying the break in the chain of energetic production in us. So this is a completely different teaching. We have the Gurdjieff tradition. It is possible for the ordinary man and woman to develop in the course of their life. Nonsense, says Gurdjieff, and proves it. This development, says the Gurdjieff tradition, is by means of work upon oneself. Nonsense, says Gurdjieff. Any attempt to change ourselves does not work and only makes our situation worse, writes Gurdjieff. The development of us, says the Gurdjieff tradition, is the development in us of consciousness of self. Nonsense, says Gurdjieff. We don't have consciousness of self and we can't develop it. It's not like a muscle that if you try and use it, it will get stronger and stronger. It's like a motor car that's run out of petrol. We don't have the energy. It just doesn't go. If we give it the energy, it will go. But you can't make it stronger by work upon oneself. We don't have consciousness of self. Gurdjieff is talking about a transformation of the whole organism, a raising of the energetic level of the whole organism up to a new level, at which point our development can begin. The car has petrol and it goes. We don't have to work upon it. It goes because it has the petrol. So these are two completely different teachings. So I can't remember your initial question, but perhaps I've answered it. If not, just ask me it again. No problem. I'm good at repeating myself. I'm told. The question of the pupil. In what you have said and explained to us, you are speaking of two situations, a depleted energetic state, which you are suggesting is our present situation, and a more augmented energetic state that is a possibility for us. Where in the book, The Tales of Beelzebub to His Grandson, does Gurdjieff write about these two different energetic situations? The teacher replies, well, first of all, can I just say that you have hold of my testicles and you are squeezing them very hard. So, relax your grip. Let me breathe and I can explain this situation to you. As I have said, in 1950, the book In Search of the Miraculous by P.D. Ouspensky was published. Anyone could buy it, anyone could read it. In this book, there are two food diagrams. These are absolutely unique. And you have to read this book to understand them, and you have to listen to me to understand their significance in terms of Gurdjieff's teaching. Now, Ouspensky, let me go back a bit in time. The time sequence is quite important in my opinion. Ouspensky died in 1947 in London. The book In Search of the Miraculous had not been published. It was in manuscript form only. In 1948, copies of this manuscript, a copy of this manuscript was taken to Paris and was read to Gurdjieff, an elderly man. He was 82 years old. Gurdjieff listened to readings of parts of this manuscript. He said this book very exact. But that's not what he said. He said, this book very exact. He writes what I say. That's a different statement. It means that where Ouspensky, the journalist, adept, trained to talk to people, to interview people and to write down exactly what they had said, where Ouspensky is recording Gurdjieff's speech, what did Gurdjieff actually say? This book very exact. In the interpretation of what Gurdjieff said, which is actually the majority of this book, it constitutes the bulk of this book. This is not exact, because this is Ouspensky's interpretation, Ouspensky's understanding of the very exact things that Gurdjieff said. So, what I'm saying to you, I've said there are two completely different teachings associated with Gurdjieff. The book In Search of the Miraculous is one teaching. In this respect, I'm referring to the overall impression that the book gives, because the bulk of this book is Ouspensky's misinterpretation and misunderstanding of Gurdjieff. But in what Gurdjieff actually said, recorded very exactly by Ouspensky, we can benefit enormously. This is what Gurdjieff said. And the implications from what Gurdjieff said, if we take out of this book those direct quotes from Gurdjieff that are very exact, we get a true picture, a truer picture of Gurdjieff's teaching. Because these are very exact. Now if we go a little bit beyond that and look at these food diagrams that you've asked about in your question, this teaching of hydrogens, carbons, nitrogens, oxygens, ray of creation, 3 rays of creation, this is absolutely unique. It may be true, it may not be true, it doesn't matter too much at the moment. We have no means of verifying this. But it's unique. And when we look therefore at these 2 food diagrams and compare them, this is something that in a sense Gurdjieff very exactly said to Ouspensky. He didn't say it, he drew it. He showed him these 2 food diagrams. So these are the crucial pieces of information. One depicts the situation of us, although Ouspensky doesn't write this and Ouspensky misinterpreted this. One depicts to us what appears to be a depleted energetic state. The situation of the ordinary man or woman. The other, in comparison to the first, depicts what appears to be an augmented energetic state. This is as we should be, the normal man or woman, given that we as ordinary men and women exist, as Gurdjieff writes, in the abnormal, we are abnormal, external conditions of ordinary, we are ordinary, being existence established by us ourselves. So we have 2 food diagrams. One depicting our present ordinary state. The other, apparently an augmented food diagram, depicting our energetic state, the energetic state that we should have as normal men and women. This is how we should be. And we can compare these 2 diagrams. Because if I go back to what I've said earlier, Gurdjieff said of this book very exact. But it's not exact in terms of the interpretation placed upon it by Ouspensky. It's very exact. He write what I say. Ouspensky, reproduced the food diagrams, which we can only assume were very exactly given to him by Gurdjieff. Now if we take these food diagrams and transpose them into Gurdjieff's own book, The Tales of Beelzebub to his grandson, where this is much more hidden, much more discreet, much more difficult to understand, for whatever reason I don't know, or at least I'm not going to tell you, we find the same situation. So although I've said, and this is an important point that I want to make, although I've said that there are 2 completely different teachings associated with Gurdjieff, there is the Gurdjieff tradition actually coming from Ouspensky, and Ouspensky's misinterpretations and misunderstanding of Gurdjieff. There is Gurdjieff's own teaching in his own book, written down very exactly by him, The Tales of Beelzebub to his grandson. Actually, there is an overlap in certain areas that is very precise. And it's here that the fact that these 2 books were both published in 1950, and we can read these 2 books, and we can study the differences between these 2 books, this allows us eventually, and allowed me, after decades of studying the differences between these 2 books, to suddenly realise, actually, there are some very important areas, very exact areas, where they coincide, where they are the same. And so this is telling me, this is what Gurdjieff was teaching. So the Gurdjieff teaching, the real teaching of Gurdjieff, is in these 2 food diagrams. One depicts the depleted energetic state of the ordinary man, and Gurdjieff is saying there should be a transformation, an energetic change. We must raise the energetic background to the whole organism until we have the energetic situation depicted in the second food diagram, which appears to us to be an augmented energetic state, but is actually, this is how we should be. And only then, Gurdjieff is writing, can any further development begin. question of the pupil. You have referred to the two food diagrams in the book In Search of the Miraculous, a book by Ouspensky, and seem to be implying their significance in the teaching of Gurdjieff, whilst at the same time saying there are two completely different teachings associated with the name of Gurdjieff. Are the food diagrams Ouspensky's teaching, or are they Gurdjieff's teaching, given that there are two completely different teachings associated with Gurdjieff? The teacher replies, when we compare the two books, the two teachings, the book In Search of the Miraculous by Ouspensky and the book The Tales of Beelzebub to His Grandson by Gurdjieff, it is absolutely obvious, as far as I am concerned, that these are two completely different books, two completely different teachings. Now, to disentangle these two teachings takes a long, long time. I have done so. It has taken decades. But I'm quite confident in saying that I can tell you every difference between these books at all the different levels. That is, in terms of the details. To give you an example, Gurdjieff writes that man is a three-centred or three-brained being throughout his writings. Ouspensky writes there are not three centres in the ordinary man. So it's a detail, but it's completely different. For Gurdjieff there are three centres. For Ouspensky there are not three centres in the ordinary man. But equally at higher and higher levels, more complex levels, levels that require a more subtle understanding, both of the Gurdjieff tradition coming from Ouspensky and of Gurdjieff's own teaching. At these levels, they are different teachings. Ouspensky says, it is possible for the ordinary man or woman to develop in the course of their life, and this development is by means of work upon oneself. It's part of the Gurdjieff tradition. To deny this would be absurd. This is the Gurdjieff tradition. Gurdjieff writes in the Tales of Beelzebub to his grandson, it's absolutely impossible for the ordinary man or woman to change anything in themselves, to develop in any way. Any attempt to change oneself does not work and only makes our situation worse. We've got to prove this first before we can take on what follows in Gurdjieff's teaching. We can't develop in any way. We're stuck totally. We can't do anything about this. This is what Gurdjieff told Ouspensky, and this is what is written in the Tales of Beelzebub to his grandson. So we have two teachings, completely different, and we have two books, completely different. However, Gurdjieff was teaching Ouspensky his teaching. Ouspensky has recorded very exactly what Gurdjieff said. So there is an area, or there are areas of overlap, where these two teachings are the same. They may use different language, they may use different, shall we say, imagery, they may use different associations, but essentially they're saying the same thing. Two examples of this which are connected: the two food diagrams. Gurdjieff is saying, and this is written explicitly at the start of the Tales of Beelzebub to his grandson. I pointed out this paragraph at the previous All and Everything conference in 2010 in Greece, in Loutraki in Greece. I pointed out this paragraph where Gurdjieff writes that he's going to transform us, to give us the properties we should have as normal men and women. We don't have these properties, we don't have these qualities. And we have these two food diagrams because Gurdjieff's teaching is an energetic teaching, one depicting the depleted energetic state of the ordinary man As we are, we live in the abnormal external conditions of ordinary being existence established by us ourselves, as Gurdjieff writes. The other food diagram depicts what appears to be an augmented energetic state. This is how we should be. This is the end of the transformation that Gurdjieff writes about. And only at the end of this transformation can our own individual development, can any sort of development actually begin. Now the transformation this means is not a development in any way. It is a raising of the energetic level of the organism. It's not about philosophy. It's not about psychology. It's not about any of the things that you perhaps attribute to it in the Gurdjieff tradition. It's about energies and it's about structures, man the machine. We are raising the energetic level of the whole organism up to a new level. It takes a long time. It's incredibly complex, but it's a possibility. Now the other area which relates to this, Gurdjieff is teaching a transformation. This is what he writes in his own book, The Tales of Beelzebub, to his grandson. A raising of the energetic level of the whole organism up to a point where our own individual development can begin. So if we go to In Search of the Miraculous, Ouspensky's book, where there are these slight overlaps, Gurdjieff was asked, and Ouspensky records very exactly what he said. Gurdjieff was asked, from where, Mr. Gurdjieff, does the way begin? The way of individual development, the way of development begin. And Gurdjieff said the way begins at a level much higher than the level of ordinary life. So what's he talking about? He's talking about the need for a transformation before the way of individual development can begin. The way begins at a level much higher than the level of ordinary life. We find the same language, we find the same ideas in both books. So this is my answer to your question. But although there are two completely different teachings, the Gurdjieff tradition is based upon not upon what Gurdjieff exactly said, but upon misinterpretations, misunderstandings of what Gurdjieff said. If we look at what Gurdjieff actually said, it corresponds perfectly with what he later wrote down in the book, The Tales of Beelzebub, to his grandson. So there is an overlap at certain points. But we've got to be very careful, because where Ouspensky is giving his opinion, and to give an example of this, Ouspensky writes somewhere, you will find it in the book In Search of the Miraculous, he writes somewhere, I found in self-remembering, the idea of self-remembering, a new philosophical principle. Well, Gurdjieff wasn't teaching philosophy. He wasn't teaching psychology. So we can start to see how Ouspensky's misinterpretations and misunderstandings of what Gurdjieff exactly said shift our viewpoint to a misunderstanding and a misinterpretation of Gurdjieff's teaching, which is the Gurdjieff tradition. But if we concentrate on, first of all, finding all the points at which the two teachings differ, only then can we find those points, precise points, where the two teachings are actually the same, they coincide. Gurdjieff speaks about the need for a transformation. To Ouspensky he spoke about the stairway. The way begins at a level much higher than the level of ordinary life. Between ordinary life at the low level and the way at the higher level lies the stairway, a transformation, a raising of the energetic level of the whole organism before any individual development can begin. This is Gurdjieff's teaching, nothing to do with philosophy, nothing to do with psychology, nothing to do with the teaching that is the Gurdjieff tradition. It is a raising of the energetic level of the whole organism over a very long period of time, with great care and a very intricate process, to reach a point, a normal existence, only at which point at which point only can the way begin, the way of individual development. It's a transformation. We've got to ascend the stairway, and it's not a psychological process. It's an energetic process.